It's just that when we're trying to get people to give their ideas and throw things out there is a very vulnerable experience. By bringing a no or a yes, but you are essentially unconsciously telling them that these ideas aren't valid, and people are immediately going to shut down and they're not going to contribute.
Hello and welcome to Growing Through It, your go-to podcast for real leadership stories. I'm your host, Jen Arnold. In every episode, you'll hear straight talk from leaders who face their own challenges. We'll dive into those whoops moments and the insights that followed. This podcast is about the lessons that refine us, shared to help you confidently lead in your own style. Whether you're looking to steer your team towards success or just seeking a spark of inspiration, you're in the right place. Let's grow through it together. Gary, welcome to the Growing Through It podcast. I'm so glad to have you on today.
Oh my gosh, I am so happy to be here. We've talked about this and now it's happening. Yeah, let's go.
It is. Well, Gary, introduce yourself for the audience.
Yeah. So my name is Gary Ware. I run a small consultancy called Breakthrough Play, where it's my mission to assist individuals and teams to be the best versions of themselves. And I do that through a mix of improv thinking and other playful methods. It's designed to help people communicate better, collaborate better, and just be the best versions of themselves.
And I love that because I think we're both facilitators. And as you know, with facilitation, there's a wide range of abilities out there. And I find your approach very different than mine. And I love it. Like, I think you do such things that I can absolutely learn from. So I'm looking forward to bantering today. I also want to mention we're both Culture First leads.
Yes.
So we both lead a group that helps workplaces create a better world of work. You in San Diego, me in Las Vegas. And we were able to connect and transform. And then I was like, I need to have Gary on the podcast because one of the things leaders do is run meetings.
Yes.
We all heard about the meetings. We've been in meetings. We've led meetings ourselves. But I want to today just think about how we can give leaders tips on running better meetings.
Oh, for sure.
Where would you start there?
Yes. Oh, well, we should just start at the beginning.
The beginning? Before the beginning?
Before the beginning. Like before, like you actually decide, hey, we need a meeting. Like, what's the intention? As we were prepping for this, you made a good point about, does this actually need to be a meeting? So if we, can just rewind everything and get the leaders to, just reflect on the meetings that they have and, what's the purpose? Because I feel like a lot of times, we have meetings just to have meetings and a lot of them probably don't need to be there.
Mm-hmm. No, they don't. And it's almost like it's not that forward look, what's on my calendar in the next few weeks? It's like, oh, crap, there's a meeting. I'm just going to hustle into it. But rather, like, how many times do we say, oh, I've got this standard meeting? And it's like people are kind of showing up and they don't know why. We've all heard the saying that could have been an email. Like, if it could have been an email, like you said, make it an email. Yeah. That's for sure.
Agreed.
Now, one thing that I am actually at fault for doing this is the next one is before a meeting, advance warning if you actually need ideas or feedback, or if there's going to be brainstorming, which I want you to talk about in a minute when we're to the during phase. But I'm a big think out louder, and a lot of people are not. And actually, I'm not when I'm on the receiving end, right? So if someone's going to ask me something, or hey, what do you think about this? I need time. So I recommend if a leader is saying, okay, I really want to brainstorm this or give some feedback or, I process something, tell people in advance so they're not going with like, so you're not met with blank stares.
Yeah, agreed. You bring up such a great point. There are so many different communication styles out there. And if you want your team to be the best that they can, it takes a little bit of work on our part as a leader to give them things so that they can show up as their best. And for people, if you think about like introverts versus extroverts, people that are conscientious versus not as conscientious, those like little tidbits will help people come prepared. Because I know an introvert friend of mine, he dreads meetings because a lot of times that happens where all the extroverts have all the ideas and they're talking over him. and he needs time to process. He needs time to think about them. And, leaders, if you just, again, take a moment, maybe put an agenda, or if you don't, if you are the type where you like, I think it's going to be about this, maybe a few guidelines or, things that you're going to talk about, just so people can, bring whatever they need. Do we need to brainstorm? Are we going to be discussing X, Y, and Z? Put a little agenda together just so that people can prep.
Yeah. Yeah, the agenda is important. And I think when people, like leaders, if you're listening and you're going, oh God, I don't want to do a whole agenda. Like, I think it's just boiling it down to 1 to 3 key things you're trying to get out of it at the end of the meeting. And this is what we do in any training, yes. Right? Like when our client, I remember talking to a client recently and I was like, okay, well, I presented one version, but you're asking for a different version. That's a wholly different objective, right? So if we're trying to practice something, then we need to put that in versus more of the theory piece. You know what I mean? Is it going to be theory or practice or a little bit of both? So it doesn't have to be a big drawn out agenda, but just those, what do you want out of it? Again, going back to what's the point?
Yes.
It's very helpful.
Yeah.
Now, Gary, are you an extrovert or an introvert?
I'm more of an ambivert. I do get energy being around folks, but at the same time, that social battery is only too big, and I do need that time to go back and recharge and reflect. How about yourself?
More introverted as I get older, especially. I would declare myself an ambivert, but I've noticed that, social events tend to drain me. That's why when you did, so I've got to tell on Gary because I'm impressed with his energy levels, because we were at Transform Conference for 1 to 3 days. I can't remember how long you were there. Then Gary flew quite a few to a different time zone, conducted a training, and then came back to Transform, finished up the conference, and then was done. And he was still like nice, and you felt like you had energy there. Like I was impressed. Well, I don't know how you did it.
Thank you. Practice and also being aware of my own energy levels. Before, when I would go to conferences, I would be like, oh my gosh, all right, I would have a huge list of all the sessions that I want to attend to, and I overdid it. And then by the end of the day, by the end of the first day, if it's a multiple day conference, I'm spent. And it takes so much to go back. So the first thing I do is shorten it. And again, going back to meetings and whatnot, I shorten it to this is the stuff that is, if I don't go to these, 2 to 3 things, I would feel like I really missed out on something. And being okay with calling an audible. At Transform, it was a bit overwhelming, and there was a huge space between the expo hall and where all the sessions were. So there were a few times where I called an audible and said, you know what? I'm going to stay in this place right here. I was in the expo hall having a really solid conversation. I felt like it was very meaningful. It's okay if I miss that session that I was going to. I know someone who's going to be there. I'll ask them for the overview, and then I have no problem doing the Irish goodbye and just sort of sneaking away and recharging in my room.
Smart. You have learned over time. And yeah, I guess it depends. As a leader, you're running these meetings. They may not energize you. So what can you do to really think about plugging into that agenda on what could energize you, right? Be thoughtful. And if you're finding the meetings that may potentially be a drain and you're going, oh God, I really don't want this. What do you think your people are going to do, right? If you've got that headspace or there's something that's just killing you about it, then what can you do to infuse something that is exciting to you or that feels good to you? But I know that you brought up on our list longer meetings. What do you think? What is there an ideal time for a leader to hold a meeting time frame? Yeah.
So in the day and age that we're in now, when we have in-person and virtual meetings, this is going to fluctuate. So asterisks. I feel like if it's an in-person meeting, you have a little bit more leeway to have a longer meeting without needing to infuse a break. However, if you are online, those meetings need to be shorter for a few reasons. And this is backed by science. One, we're not used to looking at ourselves as long as we are in virtual meetings. So the fact that and most people don't know about the pro tip of taking off self-view so that you don't see yourself. But most people, it's so interesting. When we're in person, we're not so self-conscious. But when we're online, we're like, no, I need to see myself because is there something on my... So nonetheless, the fact that people are looking at themselves, it drains their energy way faster. So if it's a virtual meeting, if it's longer than, I want to say like 90 minutes, even that is a bit too long. You're going to need to, have a break. And another thing for virtual meetings, if it is a longer meeting, you need to change up the modality, and that's between like breakout rooms to, different forms of thinking, whether it's whiteboarding as a way to keep people engaged. In-person meetings, you have a little bit more flexibility because of the nature of how these in-person meetings happen. One, they're in person, so a lot of the rapport and stuff happens naturally, where you have to bake it in for a virtual meeting, of the sort of getting to know each other and like connecting. And then also, because we're in person and we're not looking at ourselves, we're not draining our sort of mental batteries as much. So you can potentially, I still wouldn't go more than 90 minutes without giving people a break, especially if you're not doing a lot of movement or switching things around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 90 minutes is a long time. And physiologically, we need to get up every 90 minutes just to move our muscles, refresh our brain. So, Gary, for virtual, what I'd like to do as a facilitator is every 6 to 7 minutes, I change modality. What's your threshold for your virtual modality? Is that same?
That's so interesting. I love that you put a time on that. It's about the same. Like when I think about when I'm doing virtual facilitations, each block is usually about 10 minutes. So I love that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Every 7 minutes or so, we're switching things up. And yeah, that's so spot on because it's just one of those things of keeping people's attention, because we don't necessarily know where people had come from before that. We don't know what sort of potential distractions are in their environment. And we want to keep it fresh.
Plenty.
Yeah.
There's plenty. There's always distractions, right? And I too know how guilty I am if I'm on a webinar, especially if they're not asking me any questions, I can't help but to drift away. Yep. So if they're just talking and they're not, let me say this real quick. It's just your mind wanders. And so engaging the audience every 6 to 7 minutes, changing modality, that's usually a sweet spot. But yeah, I agree. I think breaking every 90 minutes at least from a in person or virtual. It's very important.
And one thing, if I can add to that point, as a leader, you're investing time in your team by having this meeting, whatever the point of the meeting is. You would hope that they retain the information. Real fact, this came from the National Training Laboratory, and from traditional lecture and meeting formats of just someone talks at you and maybe people are taking notes and minimal sort of talk back, people only retain 10% of the information. 10%. God. That is a fraction. And if you think about you have, let's just say it's an hour meeting with 10 employees, that's a big investment for people to only retain 10%. And so again, I love how intelligent facilitators like yourself, switch things up, because that's the key. If you start to switch up the modalities, if you start to get them engaged by, whether it's, just having them poll or raise their hand or do something like that, it's going to increase the likelihood that they will retain the information.
Yeah, you're bringing me back to my corporate days, Gary, where we had town halls were actually good. I can't complain about those. Those were short, sweet, to the point. But department meetings or all hands meetings, it was like I wish I could see you right now. This series of updates, right? And you couldn't remember a damn thing at the end of the day. But all you know is you were tired. We're doing a lot of stuff, and I'm ready to go. Yep.
And people, checked out. And I only have these stats just because I presented on something recently. But this was from Atlassian. They're a platform that allows people to do, I think they have, they're sort of like Slack. They have all kinds of different things. But they did a survey of professionals that use them. And 91% of those professionals admitted to daydreaming and falling asleep during meetings, especially virtual ones. For that very reason, is that they're just sitting there, they're not expected to participate. They just need to just sit there.
Yeah. It's almost like that check in the box, right? We did it, so we're communicating. But yes, we're not actually asking them, what do you think about that? Or how does that work in your role, right? And do you like it? Do you not like it? Because God forbid you don't like it, and you can't even say anything about it.
Agreed.
That's one thing. We have a different role. We're not the one, we're not the leaders in organizations. So we can often create that safe space to say, challenge me. I'm good. How does this work? Does it not work in your environment? Because that helps your brain go, okay, well, how does this connect to my everyday life? And is it even usable? And if it's not, throw it away. We'll get to something that will be, right? But I don't think they have, unless you have a lot of great psychological safety with your leader, you're not likely to have that dissenter role unless you actively seek it out as a leader.
Yeah. Funny story. I was catching up with a friend that I happened to see on a plane. It was just random coincidence. We hadn't seen each other in person in a good year and a half, and we happened to be on the same plane going to the same direction. And so we sat next to each other and we were catching up. And they were mentioning about their environment. And they have these meetings, if not like a few times a month, it's quite frequently. And most people are like completely checked out. But these are meetings that they have to be there. But to the point about psychological safety, because it's not present, people don't feel comfortable bringing it up to leadership that, hey, what's the point of this? Or, just being candid and saying, I'm not getting much from this. Can we rethink our purpose of this?
Yeah, right. I've got a thought. I just read it down because we can talk about it like after the meeting. So let's get into the bulk of the meeting, but let me just summarize a few things that we talked about. Yep. Like before the meeting, have a reason for the meeting. Why are you meeting in the first place? Give your team advance warning if there's something you need them to do in the meeting, whether that is process something, you need ideas, you need feedback. If you're going to have a really long meeting, please break it up. Change your modality, especially virtually, but also in person. 90 minutes being a stretch, but making sure they're getting up every 90 minutes. And then also something I mentioned is if you are dreading these meetings yourself, just pay attention to that. And why are you dreading them? Do they feel pointless to you too? And can you do something to make yourself more excited about them? Because you are the leader. Yes. You can change it up, right? No one's forcing you to have these meetings but you. So something to consider. Now, the meeting started, Gary. What's a first step that you recommend?
Yes. And this is something that is not a popular thing because, again, the old way of doing things is, hey, down to business. Time is money. And it used to be, all right, meeting started. Let's get down to business. But as we talked about with psychological safety and in the virtual environment, getting people sort of grounded, that's not going to work. And so this is a term that I learned from a good friend of mine, Jenny Sawyer-Klein, from Play on Purpose. Jenny talks about connection over content. And what that basically means is how can you kick off a meeting with a moment of connection to, one, get everyone on the same place, have that level of psychological safety so that people have what I call the dose, which is dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. Those are the neurochemicals that are going to help us focus, help us feel like we belong, trust our colleagues, and be creative. And we can, I just want to start with that connection. We can talk about the specifics in just a moment, but that's essential for a good meeting.
It is, and they don't have to be long. And this is where you have to be a little careful, right? Because you can get down to business, but just give it 5 minutes, right? Yeah. So I know I still suck at timing. I'll be the first. I'm at facilitating for 20 years, and I still have to manage my time very closely. So these things can get away from us, and they can be to one person's dominating. So you have to, I completely agree. Start with connection, and you can contain it. Right? It doesn't have to take the whole meeting. It can be, hey, every hour meeting, we have 5 minutes for connection.
Yeah.
It can be that simple. And do you have some favorites that you go to or that you recommend, Gary?
Yeah. So the main thing is people want to be seen. People want to know that, hey, I'm not just some number on a spreadsheet. I'm a person. And so I have two. I have one, if you're like, hey, we do need to get down to brass tacks. We don't have a lot of time, but I want to take a moment to check in with folks. And then one, if you have a little bit more time. the quick and easy one is just a simple. So for virtual, the easiest thing that that we can do is I like to call it. It's either red, yellow, green. Just people can pop into the chat. Like, how are you currently feeling? Red, yellow, green. Green is like, yep, okay, ready to go. Yellow's like, I'm here. However, I'm not as revved up as I can be. And red is like, you're lucky you got me. This has been a challenging day. We're going to do what we can. And the reason for that, and this requires a level of vulnerability on the team. But this simple act of vulnerability does a few things. One, it allows the leader to know where their team's at. Because if you get mostly maybe yellows and reds, maybe you need to rethink a few things. Maybe we need to cut things short. Maybe we need to say, hey, look, this, maybe we skip this. I'm noticing that we're fried as a team. There's been a lot going on. So it gives the leader feedback, but it also gives everyone else feedback so that we can have empathy and support each other. And then when you see that you're not the only one that is yellow and red and, whatever the case might be, like, wow, all right, cool. All right. And so it allows people to be seen. That's something that's quick. It can be done in like less than 5 minutes and maybe like sort of like from the leader, an acknowledgement like, hey, look, I see you. I got you. And then if you have a little bit more time, it's a, fun, icebreaker type game called True for Me, where the facilitator, the leader, is just calling out simple things, and if it happens to be true for the person, you sort of raise your hand, or if you're on camera, you can go on and off camera, and so that again, that's something that people ask me, is this okay for introverts? And I say, if you give the right framing, it can be. And how I frame it is I give people permission to respond however they want. They don't have to respond. When people feel like they're not being forced, they're more at liberty to like sort of ease into it. And I tell people, hey, look, I'm going to give some statements. If it happens to be true for you, give me a little signal. And that signal can be something in the chat like, yep, true for me. But the main thing is we don't have lie detectors here. So if you don't want to disclose certain things, you don't have to. And I start, simple, fun stuff. And then depending on the read of the room, I might do something that's a little bit more vulnerable. I reserve that for like a team maybe that is a little bit more close or how I like feel how things are going. But the main point here is people are, just sort of disclosing things about themselves. The research shows that when people disclose personal information, it helps build the bonds of the team. And also a little bit of vulnerability goes a long way.
Yeah, and I love that red, yellow, green activity. And if it needs to be anonymous, put it in a poll, right? Like then no one can see, and then everyone still gets that like pulse check. Yep. I think those are all great ones. And I've used one. I keep experimenting. The bad thing is I can never just stick with one because I'm like, oh, we try this new one, right? And I've tried that one. It's true for me, but it's more. Have you ever done this? Like, have you ever been bungee jumping, right? And then cover your camera if you haven't, or put your camera on if you have. Yeah. And it's fun because everyone is like, oh, you've done that. And it kind of creates that energy there. Another one of my team members introduced me to is people who know me well know I'm happiest when. And you fill in that blank. And I use that a lot because then you find out a lot about what they like to do and it just gives that personal aspect. And it's just not just business, but you learn more about your team members or for us, people we're trying to get to know over the course of time. And then I'll just mention the culture first icebreaker and then we'll go on. Yeah. But the one that Jesse introduced me to, which you have to get vulnerable with it. If you really knew me, you would know. And you just keep peeling back the layers. And so you're volunteering what you feel comfortable to volunteer. But typically if someone goes first that feels comfortable being vulnerable, it's amazing. It's not going to work for every space. Have you used that one successfully or do you prefer to not use it?
Yes. I love that one. That's a great opener. And you're absolutely right. Especially if the leader models it and goes first. It sets the tone for everyone else of like, wow. And again, we're not saying that you need to like open the closet and let everything come out, but, just something meaningful, more than just, sort of surface level that we all sort of know. And that just like people disclosing things about themselves really helps with building that psychological safety.
Right. So prioritize connection time. 5 minutes is all you need, but if you have longer, there's some options for you as well. Now, how do you feel about, it's said in a million different ways, rules of engagement, meeting guidelines, expectations, how we show up with one another? What do you think about that? And I know it's different versus how we facilitate with new people or versus an intact team who meets on the regular. What do you think?
I think it's important for a few reasons. One, it helps frame how we all show up. If we know what the agreements are, and I call them agreements, we can call them sort of rules and whatever, it allows people to, so since I come from the world of improvisation, improv always has a frame. Here's like sort of guidelines, and then you're free to improvise within that. So if we know that our agreements as a group is that we all agree to be laser focused with our comments and stuff like that, that helps keep things going, and it doesn't again have to be so like you do this and you die, no, it just like here are some rules of the road to help us have the best meeting possible. And an interesting thing, when I was in more structured organizations, so I was in a marketing organization for a long time because that's my sort of what I trained for back in the day. They had what is called Robert's Rules of Order. So it was parliamentary rules where someone has to nominate something, has to get a second and stuff like that. And it's a reason why they have those because it helps the meeting flow. And so there's, why reinvent the wheel? It doesn't have to be so strict, but it just helps us sort of frame what kind of meeting this is and helps everyone flow.
Yes. I'm recently on it, like on a volunteer board, and it's Robert's Rules of Order. But they had some interesting guidelines. But one of the things that I thought was important that they didn't do was keep revisiting those. It felt like they did it the first time or two, and they're like, we know those things. Mm-hmm. But I think it's important to say, okay, here's the way we show up with one another. But let's pull that thread a little bit more. If you're going to have a meeting agreements, how do you call someone on it when they're not meeting those agreements?
That's a great point. And as a leader, one, you need to model. You need to model how you, how things should go. And two, the leader should be one of the first people. And I like to, instead of using the word call out, I like to call people in. And it's sometimes a little bit challenging in a virtual environment. And I don't have it within arm's reach, but I got these really cool cards that were sent to me at the beginning of the pandemic that I was working with a team for a whole year and everyone had them. And they were like cards that like said, slow down or let's revisit this. And people had permission to like sort of hold these up when again, that was part of the agreements of, hey, look, if certain things meant everyone had permission to do them. But my main point is leaders need to model it. Leaders should be the first to call people in, and it should be done, gently. And that sort of sets the precedent because the moment we lax up on that, things can go awry.
Yeah. And you can do it in a very kind way. You can also do it in a funny way. Like I prefer to be like, let's just poke at each other. Like you just have a word that you say whenever you're like violating the agreements and someone just puts it out there and you agree on the word. And then you're like, okay, we're not on track. Right.
Yep.
How can we get those done? So it seems formal, but it's just like we do with every Culture First gathering, right? We have our 5 guiding principles. Yep. So what if a leader created their 3 guiding principles? Here's how we want meetings to run, or come to it as a group, right? We're going to nail down 3 to 5 core principles of our meetings. Let's all think about that. And then you go from there. And they're going, it's co-created. You have these guidelines. And then how do we keep each other accountable? That's important. And it's important for it's not always the leaders modeling. And I think it's also important for peers to go, hey, we need to get back on track if we're going to stay on with our guidelines or whatever that looks like.
I love code words.
Mm-hmm. Have you heard any good ones? I know in the recesses of your mind, do you have any good code words?
So I do this activity. It's called Color Events Emotion. And it's a fun storytelling game that helps people get better at storytelling. So in the activity, someone is telling a true story that they've told time and time again, then there is the person that is the storytelling coach. That coach, imagine they have like a remote in their hand, and they can call one of three commands that helps the storyteller. And one is color, which means, hey, give me more detail. So if the color command is called, the person telling the story must put a pin exactly where they are and give more detail about that exact moment. Maybe what the room looked like, or what people were wearing. Just more detail, just to paint a better picture for us. And then they advance. All right, advance always means let's forward the story along, and it can be used at any point. And then emotion is like, emotion. All right, cool. Well, I was feeling this, this, and this. So I've always done it through the context of getting better at storytelling. I did it with this project management team. So these were people that were the project managers of this large product company that had the SaaS-based service. And after we did it for them, they realized they wanted to use those three code words in their meetings to help people, especially when sometimes they're working with dev folks, and they're just like so straight to the point, and we need more detail. So again, the words are just harmless because it doesn't have any baggage attached to it. So like, hey, Mark, can you color that for me? And Mark knows, detail. Or the big one, advance, was something for everyone. It's like, hey, Lindsay, let's advance this right now, and we can circle back. I know we're using like jargon and whatnot. We should limit that, but it's that's the whole point of stuff like that, is shortcuts to help us, move through. But they use that, and I was like, oh wow, that's so cool that they adapted that from a storytelling activity to help them run their meetings better.
I love that, Gary. So it's color, advance, and then is an emotion is the last one?
Emotion's the third, yeah.
Okay. I love that. Okay. Well, listeners, I think that's one to go with. I'm going to use advance for my kids when they're telling me some long story. Advance. I've heard enough.
Yep. Can we advance that? Advance.
Now, how do you get people involved? Because that is what I've seen a lot. That's what we've talked about. The leaders running the meeting, and people, the extroverts are talking, and then the quiet people are like, oh, they're not going to hear what I have to say anyway. Or maybe I need more time to process and I'm not ready to speak up. How do you suggest that leaders get the quieter people involved?
Yeah, so there's a few ways. One, if you need feedback on information, you're absolutely right. A lot of times the extroverts tend to have ideas first, or maybe they're a verbal processor where they just start, talking, and they're sort of figuring it out as they speak. It's all good. And then the introverts need more processing time. So as a facilitator, one of the things I do when I need feedback, I give people time. I said, hey, we went through this section. I want to get some feedback, what you think, and I give them prompts. So like, what are your 3 takeaways? How does this make you feel? How can we apply this in our day-to-day? Whatever the case might be. And then, and people have a challenge with this, I pause and I say, I'm going to give everyone 30 seconds to think about this and be okay with sitting in this. I, in a virtual environment, I always have music and stuff queued up, so it's not so awkward. But this works in person. This works virtually. And then in virtual, what I love about this is one of the things that I love about the virtual environment. We have the chat box. And so what I invite people to do is, all right, everyone has some ideas. All right, don't hit enter yet, but I invite them, to do that chat storm where everyone puts their thoughts in the chat box, and then we all, hit enter at the same time, and then they sort of cycle through, and then we have a chance to go up and review them and sort of see everyone's thoughts. So now it's not one person dominating, and then you get people that sort of like hive mind and like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. So that's one way that can be done in person. We can adapt some virtual tools in an in-person environment. There's things like Mentimeter and whatnot where, we can be in an in-person meeting. We can pull it up. People can take a moment, type in their things. It can be anonymous, or it can be, it can have the person's name or whatever, and boom, it can show up, on the whiteboard, through a projector, and then we can go and upvote them or whatever the case may be. So that is, if we have ideas that we want people to contribute to, that's, so I'll start with that one. That's an easy way to invite everyone to easily step into it.
Yeah, I like those. And the only things I'd add is like I would call on them, assuming you have some kind of level of safety with your leader, because some people are just waiting to be called on. And
Yeah.
also, kind of getting to what you said earlier is like it's okay to pass. Like, hey, so and so, do you have some thoughts? It's okay if you need time to process. I just want to make sure you have space. Right? Like just giving the space so they'll get called on and not overrun. And another one I've learned is just a 1 to 2 minute white paper. Like you just write your thoughts down, right? So, hey, same exact what you said, the chat storm, but it's even just writing on paper. Take a minute, write down your thoughts, write your bullet points, and then we'll come back together just to give some processing time there too. But it is important to have everyone be able to have their voice heard. Now, one thing that you put in the document as we were sharing ideas, activities. So let's just say you're trying to get some feedback from your employees. You're trying to get maybe not feedback as I'm looking for, but ideas. You're trying to brainstorm. You're trying to get the creative juices flowing, if you will. What do you recommend? Because you do this all the time. That's your jam, right?
Yes. Yeah, I love doing this. So I'm going to start with the wackiest first. A lot of times, especially in professional environments, people don't like, quote unquote, looking bad. But we have to set the frame that when we're brainstorming, there is no such thing as a bad idea. As a leader, you can say that all you want. However, people's brains can still go to that place of like, I don't know, I don't think I'm creative or whatever the case might be. So my way of getting past that is an idea called wrong answers only, or worst idea possible. And so we give them a prompt, give them like what are we trying to solve for? And, if we, if we're going to put them in groups, we can do that, or take your idea and have them sort of journal for 1 to 2 minutes. What are the worst ideas possible for that?
Love that one. Mm-hmm.
And it's really fun. It's very playful, and everyone can go to that because again, let's just get to the very bad, and then we have people sort of share those ideas however you want to share them. Whether in a sort of virtual program or in chat or something like that, or start to call on people. But then we start to take them. So what I like to do with this is put them in a thing where we can rank them so that we can prioritize them. And then what we do is we unpack them to find out what makes them so bad. And then the inverse naturally shows up. Like for example, say it's a customer service thing, and we're trying to figure out how can we be a sort of like a luxury type environment. So then it's like, all right, well, what's a 1-star? What's a 1-star environment like? Yeah, when they come in, we don't acknowledge them. We call them names. We don't provide this, that, and the other. It's like, all right, cool. So let's start to like unpack that and what's the inverse of that. And then of course now you have all these ideas, and now we can prioritize them based on values or based on if you have like a project brief and whatnot on what you're trying to solve for.
Yeah, I love that one. It is fun. I've introduced that to a client, and I wasn't when I was like, "Oh, here's how you could get to it," because in our session everyone was in groups and they were thinking of all these ideas. And I remember someone saying, "Well, that's not possible." And say, "Hey, we're not talking about reality here. We're just talking about because people like to kill the brainstorming before it even gets off the ground, right? We're not talking about all of this logistics of the solution." So I love the worst ideas because you're actually trying to make them actively bad. And who can argue with that? Right. And the goal is to get maybe the worst idea out there, which is different, right?
This is like sort of the core of what I do, especially when we're introducing brainstorming, is an improv thinking mechanism called yes and. This is the foundation of improv. And what that states is yes and means that you accept the idea, you accept what we call an offer, and you build on it. For you to say, oh, that's not going to work, that's a denial. That if we're trying to co-create a story, that's going to squash the story and we don't get to move forward. So when we're in this yes and mindset, we're trying to think of as many, ideas as possible. This is where everything is possible. And I like to say, it doesn't mean that you have to agree with it. It just means that you accept that is someone's idea and how can we work with it? How can we build on it? And so I like to tell people, all right, that's the mindset that we're in right now. We're in a yes and mindset. We're not downplaying people's ideas. We're not dismissing them. We are accepting and we're building. Then we have all the ideas. Now for the people that likes to be the yeah but people, that like to find fault. All right, cool. Let's poke holes in these. Now we're in that mindset. What are all the reasons why this can't work? And let's list them. So there, each one of these has a place. It's just that when we're trying to get people to give their ideas and throw things out there is a very vulnerable experience. By bringing a no or a yes but, you are essentially unconsciously telling them that these ideas aren't valid, and people are immediately going to shut down, and they're not going to contribute.
Absolutely. Yeah, you just have to create that safe space and yes and it. I like that. And that's a great way of just course correcting people without slapping their hand, right? No, we're yes anding it right now.
Another code word.
Yeah, yes, a safe code word. So I have a thought too about another kind of tangent, but before I take us on there, any other ideas, brainstorming? And it's okay if you don't have it. I know you have a ton. You probably spend the whole time talking about it. Anything else to add?
Good starting point. Yeah, I think that's a good starting point of creating safe space, using yes and as a framework so that people can contribute ideas, use things like, wrong answers only and the worst possible idea as a way to get people's creative juices flowing so that they get out of their own way. And then, using different frameworks to move the process forward. So going from the yes and to generate ideas to the, all right, yeah, but to sort of chop things up and scrutinize them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was just thinking, as a leader, sometimes we need feedback. I used to always ask, I'd have these ideas. My poor team. I think about all the things I did to them, but I was like, hey, I've got this idea. What do you think? And I've said this before, but it didn't really give them permission to say, I don't like it. It's not that good. It was really kind of probably just oh yeah, Jen, great idea. Right. So when I was taking a neuroscience course, they were talking about giving people a dissenter role. Right. So even if you have this imaginary hat you put on, you're like, Gary, you're the dissenter. You have to, it's your job to poke holes for it. And then you pass it to the next person and you pass it to the next person. And if a leader is brave enough to say, okay, here's an idea, it could be a complete crap idea, or there could be some merit to it, but I need some honest feedback. And it has to, again, caveat, disclaimer, has to be a safe space, but giving people that role and saying, I require you to be a dissenter and then give everyone a turn can be helpful with no one off the hook. Yeah, kind of have to find something.
Yeah.
So speaking of time, I'm world's worst, so I want to be mindful of your time. But the one thing that I want to mention is an intentional close, right? So again, if we're running, what I've seen commonly, what I've done many times, to be quite honest, is I don't leave enough time for the close, and everyone's just rushing out of the meeting or, yeah, great training, and then they take off. So do you have some thoughts around building in an intentional close?
Yes. This I started adapting from what we do with Culture First, but it's more of getting folks to think about the time that we had together and so what's next steps. So if it's just a simple sort of check-in things, oftentimes you just want to know, how are people feeling? So maybe you redo the red, green, yellow as a close, just to get people to sort of check in again. Hey, how are you feeling now? Are you and then is there, what's the delta between what it was before? Maybe that's good enough. Or maybe it's more of checking for understanding. Yes, my background is in improv thinking. I've been performing as an improviser and teaching improv for the last 13 to 15 years. And after every class, we do a check for understanding where everyone goes around and says, what is one thing that they learned? So that's something that I love to put into my work. What is one thing that people learned, or one thing that they're going to do? One of those things. So there's so many things that you can do. But Jen, you brought up a good point of having space for the checkout, so that especially as a leader, you know where people stand, because far too often these meetings are just like that. we go through the list of stuff and it went over and they're like, oh, we got to go. All right, bye. And we have no idea. Did it stick? Did it land? And we cross our fingers in hope that they retained something.
Yeah. Yeah. Because even if you're doing, let's just say one of those departmental meetings, like just getting people to write it on a sticky was one thing you learned as a leave behind. And then, what did they actually take away from it? Or if you're in a team meeting, what's an action step, right? Like, what are we doing with this? Because if you keep finding that there's no action after each meeting, then you're going, why did we meet anyway? Right? Like you should be meeting for a purpose. And even if the actions, it's team building, like, so what are you going to do to actually continue those connections after this conversation?
Yeah. What are you going to do?
Right? So how can you create that action?
Learning.
Right. That's a lot. All right. I'm going to repeat this real quick and then we'll just wrap up.
Yes.
So we talked about starting with connection. So 5 minutes more if you have it, but 5 minutes minimum. Have meeting agreements to get everyone on the same page. If possible, co-create them. Let everyone talk, even the quiet people. Kindly. What would you say? Kindly call people in. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Call people in. Otherwise known as stop rabbit holes, by kindly calling people in and getting the meeting back on track. And then we just talked about an intentional close. So one thing I want to just say after the meeting, and then I'll leave space for anything else you want to add, is you brought this up earlier in the meeting, and I had to take a note because as a leader, how do you get some feedback from your team after the meeting? Was it worth your time? Or what would have made it more worth your time? And just keep iterating, right? Keep asking for that feedback and making the meetings better. And if they keep saying, I wish we didn't meet, you need to go do some detective work. But got to get some feedback to know what's landing and what's not.
Yeah. And so an easy and fun, playful way of doing that is 3 questions that I learned from a good friend of mine, Danny Kim, is I liked, I wish, I will. What did I like? So again, starting with the positive. What did I wish? Oh, I wish this meeting would have been shorter, or I wish we would have covered X, or whatever the case may be. And I will. I will commit to doing this. I will commit to doing that. I will make sure that I come to the meeting prepared with this, or whatever the case may be. And it's, again, an easy way. Maybe you have people journal it. Maybe you have a few people share those things, or again, maybe you have like a working doc, like a digital sort of thing that you can capture all this so that the leader can pull this feedback. But yeah, this is an easy way of quickly getting feedback.
Yeah, I like that. And when I heard from another facilitator was, I wish, I wonder. Like, I wonder what, like, kind of what questions are you still left with? And I loved it. Yeah. I was like, oh, I'm stealing that one. Because oftentimes there's still some kind of like, oh, I wonder what happened to X, Y, and Z. So yeah, I like, I wish, I will, or I like, I wish, I wonder. Great ways to get some feedback. Now, Gary, anything else, any other considerations leaders should think about around facilitating their meetings?
Yeah, this doesn't require a lot of chat on our part, but as a leader, we challenge you in the beginning. Does this need to be meeting? And I want to ask, all right, it does need to be meeting. Does it need to be the same way every time? If you did it on Zoom, maybe you have to do it virtually. Maybe you do it on Zoom with video off and have people on their devices and have them outside walking around. So we go back to those old school, before Zoom was like the main platform du jour, where we were just conferencing, it was just phone call and stuff like that. Or if it's an in-person meeting, maybe, you do something, different, the way it's set up, by switching things up, it does make it new again and it sort of revives it. So that's my one thing to add.
God, I love that, Gary, because I do that sometimes when I just meet with colleagues. Like, let's just do a walk and talk. Like, I just want to walk around my neighborhood. So we forget that's a possibility, right?
Yeah.
I think that's a good one. I think one other thing to mention is sometimes as leaders, it gets to be a little bit discouraging because you try your best, you're really doing all the things and you still get people complaining. So what I like to do, or what I did in the past, is like, all right, well, we're going to alternate planning the meeting. So you plan this meeting, and then they get it done, right? And then you realize it's not easy. Not everyone's going to be happy, but then you get to feel like you have a say in all the things you don't like, then go correct those. So, and then you can take some of the work off yourself, right? Delegate that out. And they may be better at it than you. They may enjoy it more than you. And you may be enjoying sitting back and just kind of being there as the leader.
Oh my gosh, I love that. And that just popped a memory. I totally forgot about this. When I had teams and I ran meetings, we had meeting roles and we rotated them. So someone was the time czar, and that was their job to keep us on track based off of the agenda and stuff like that. So they would be the one. Yeah. So it switched every time. They would be the one that would be kindly, calling people in, and it didn't have to be the same person every time. Someone was the meeting holder. So they had the, they were the facilitator. So they ran the agenda, stuff like that. Someone, was the one, was the celebrator, that sort of brought the positive energy and kept everything flowing and stuff like that. So I love that, switching up roles. It helps bring your team in, and hopefully they'll see it's not easy and they have more empathy.
It's not. Yes. I love that. Giving people like roles that change every time, and then they'll go, oh yeah, whoops, we're off track, right? I think that's brilliant, Gary. Well, God, this has been a lot. Hopefully we've given the audience a lot of things to do that doesn't overwhelm them. Even if they just start with one thing, I think that would be a step up from most meetings. But Gary, where can people find out more about you and your work?
Yeah. So if you're listening to this and you're like, wow, this is really interesting. That Gary's a pretty cool guy. I want to learn more. You can go to my website, breakthroughplay.com. I'm also pretty active on LinkedIn. You can look me up by my name, Gary Ware. Say hi, reach out. I love this stuff. I love chatting about this stuff. Happy to chat more and go deeper.
Well, thank you, Gary. I'll link that up in the show notes.
Thank you for having this platform to share useful tips for leaders, because I know it's not easy and it is challenging to find useful information that is actionable. So, thank you for putting this on and helping us out.
Absolutely. Thanks for being a part, Gary. I appreciate it. Thank you for joining us on Growing Through It. I'm Jen Arnold, and it's been a pleasure sharing this time with you. If today's story sparked something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to our podcast, leave a review, and share it with your fellow leaders. And remember, each episode comes with a nugget of wisdom that we expand on in our newsletter. So if you're eager to put these insights into action, head over to our website at growthsignals.co and sign up for exclusive content that'll give you an edge in your leadership journey. Keep growing, and I'll connect with you again soon in our next episode. Until then, take the lessons learned and lead authentically.